Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Rico.
I'm Tony.
And this is the podcast known as Relatively Sound, the podcast with the perfect opening line. Now, today, Tony and we're taking a little break from our album for album series. We've been doing that for the last several months, but Tony and I have some free time for this next couple of weeks. And we wanted to try to crank out some videos, but also crank out different style of videos. But today we're not going to stray too far from what we've been doing. We're kind of sticking with albums, but we're going with the theme today. And this theme is album opening tracks. Now, I don't know about you, Tony, but I listen to a lot of albums front to back. And an opening track, you might say, is one of the most important aspects when it comes to an album, when it comes to like sequencing, right?
When it comes to a first listen, of course, in particular, because if you know the album but you're tired of the opener, you can always just skip it. But there's definitely times where like I'll listen to an album and I'm like, this opener kind of sucks, and then I kind of skip ahead, and I just feel like that doesn't set up the album very well.
You want it to hook you in some way, right? And you want it to make it so that you want to continue listening to the album. Just like how an album closer, you kind of want to make it to where you want to go back to the album again. And we'll get to closers on another episode in the future. But today is just going to be album openers. And what Tony and I did is we came up with different categories for different album openers. And let's just start with the first one. One of the categories we came up with was album openers that begin with a lead single. Now, this one's kind of interesting because, when an album is released, usually there's a single that predates it, at least a couple of weeks, if not maybe a couple of months. Nowadays, it seems like there's a long time between the first single and the album, but I would say decades ago, maybe it was shorter. Um, and, one of those actually is Nirvana's Nevermind, beginning with probably the band's most well known song, Smells Like Teen Spirit. And that song actually only came out like a week and a half before the album dropped. Now, I'm not the biggest Nirvana fan, so I'm a little biased. So maybe I'll let Tony speak to this one a little bit more. In fact, I don't know if I've even listened to Nevermind all the way through.
That's
So
crazy. You should.
they're just one of those bands I could never get into, despite liking a lot of other bands from that time period. But Tony, since you've listened to Nevermind, like, how do you think this song begins the album?
I mean, I think it begins. I think it is a really good opener for the album because I think it is one of the more maybe objectively interesting songs, kind of structurally and what's going on. And then, I mean, because I wasn't there during the time, I wasn't alive for it. I can't really speak about the impact it has, on people at the time and for not only for the band but just for music as a whole for that community. But when a song is that impactful, you probably should start the album with it. But I didn't know though until you had mentioned it that it was the single only came out a week before. So I'm not even sure if the song was like immediately
As impactful?
yeah, or if it wasn't until the album came out and a few weeks later people have been listening to the single and then it kind of started happening. But yeah, I do think Smells Like Teen Spirit is one of the stronger songs on the album, although it's not my favorite, just probably from fatigue. But yeah, and it's a little bit heavier too. I definitely think it's wise for a band to maybe put something a little heavier at the front. It just kind of gets you hyped, right?
Now, Tony, can you confirm that Weird Al's cover begins that album that it's off of?
Ooh, top of my head, I kind of want to
Because
say it
isn't isn't
does.
his isn't that Weird Al album a parody of the Nirvana album cover as well? Off isn't it called Off the Deep End?
Yes, yes, and it has a lovely picture of him chasing a donut. And yes, Smells Like Nirvana does begin that
Wow,
album.
and we
You were correct
mentioned
there.
offhand before we started the episode, if we could naturally bring in Weird Al, we would, and we did it within like the first 3 minutes. So
Although it is not the title track, but
not
it
the
is the
title
only
track,
one on our list that
but
starts with a parody.
yeah, that's true. And then the one I wanted to bring up too for lead singles that begin an album is, of course, the classic White Stripes song, Seven Nation Army, that opens up their album Elephant. Now that is one that was released like a month or two before the album's release. And again, even though I wasn't back then listening to the White Stripes, it is one of the I feel like it's one of the more recognizable modern rock songs today. I mean, you hear people at football stadiums doing like the chant to the melody of the song, right? You hear it in commercials, you hear it in TV shows and movies, and it's I don't know, it's just like it's one of those songs where you get tired of hearing it, but whenever I put on Elephant and I listen to it front to back, and you just begin with the I'm just like I'm pumped. And I kind of feel like that's probably what Smells Like Teen Spirit does for people who love Nirvana. They're probably like I got to sit through the album opener that's like the most popular song from the band. But then like once you're like a minute into it, you're like, oh shit, like yeah, this is a great opener.
That is true. Like if you actually give it a chance and listen to either one of these songs, you're like, okay, damn, that is a pretty good song.
Yeah.
I am into it. It's just kind of getting past that mental barrier. So for Elephant, because I don't really know that album that well, do you feel like it's a good like representation of the album, or do you think there's like a better opener even, or do you think maybe just because the song is so big, that's kind of what makes it a good opener?
I think it's a little bit of that. I do think out of all the songs on an album, it begins it the best. Like it would be the best opener. Like Ball and Biscuit, kind of, but like that one's a little. It takes a little bit for that one to kind of launch into like the little bit more heavier the solos. Where Seven Nation Army is just, it is like just kind of verse chorus, right? But it packs a punch. It does what it needs to do. It's catchy. It's a little bluesy. It's a little modern. Like it gets the job done. So, and I mean, if you haven't heard Elephant, definitely check out Elephant. Now, the next category Tony and I came up with, curveball openers, a song that begins an album that you're not expecting it to. Now, that you can look at it at different ways. One could be, this does not sound like the band's or artist's previous album, right? Or it could be, this song on this album doesn't sound like anything else on the album. So there's kind of different ways you can look at a curveball opener, right? It's just not like, it's kind of the opposite of what we just said about the last two songs. Like Seven Nation Army does sound like the rest of the album. And I assume Nevermind, Smells Like Teen Spirit, sounds like the rest of that album. But Tony's about to talk about one that I do think is really different from the rest of the songs on the album.
I'm a really big fan of the Foo Fighters Doll from is it just the color and the shape?
The color and the shape, yes.
Okay, I always want to add extra words to that one for whatever reason. But yes, I think that is a great opener, a curveball opener, because it's a short song. It's a minute and 23 seconds. It's soft, and it's like Dave singing almost kind of like a ballad type thing. There's an interesting chord progression, which a lot of Foo Fighter songs are pretty straightforward progressions, and the whole song kind of has like kind of a sound like it's coming out of a radio. And then when it comes out of it, you go straight into Monkey Wrench, which to me is still one of their like just kind of most energetic songs, and it's kind of one that I think I don't really hear as much as their other singles, but I kind of wish I did. And for me, what works so well about it is it's short. If you're gonna give me a curveball opener, I think it should probably sound good, even though it's not maybe on brand with the rest of the album. And it shouldn't, I don't want to tell myself as I'm listening, like, when is it gonna kick in? Especially if you already know the band, if it's kind of bullshitty or whatever. But no, to me, Doll holds up really well on its own. I think it's the perfect length. The contrast is fantastic. And I think it's a really good way for the Foo Fighters to introduce new colors to the band, kind of show the variety that they can do, even if they don't always choose to do so. But of course, later on with all their records, we've seen plenty of variety.
Yeah, and they did a very similar thing with their album Concrete and Gold. I think the song's titled T-shirt that begins that album, and it's very similar. I remember the album came out, people were like, "Oh, this is Doll Part 2."
Really?
Unfortunately,
Okay.
the rest of the album stands up not nearly as well as Color and Shape. It's actually probably my least favorite Foo Fighters album. But another one that Tony and I actually talked about this album recently, and by recently I mean last week, is Wilco's album, The Whole Of, which begins with the song Art of Almost.
so far away from my waistline.
Now, Wilco has actually a lot of albums that began with kind of longer, more kind of different sounding openers. A Ghost is Born begins with At Least That's What You Said, which is kind of a longer one. A lot of guitar solos in that song. I'm Trying to Break Your Heart is a very famous opener for Wilco, but Art of Almost, I feel like, is even more out of left field than those two songs. I mean, it begins with kind of some industrial type noises. You have these like swelling sounds that happen before the vocals come in. And then when the vocals come in, everything kind of cuts out. And then you kind of then get into the chorus of the song and the feel of the song. And you think you kind of know where it's going. But as Tony said during his reaction, you're like halfway through, you're like, okay, the song's like building and we're only halfway through the song. Like, where's this going to go? And it just builds and builds and it takes a while to build. But then once it gets there, boom, you get hit with a Neil solo. The song goes into like this double time sound and the song just explodes. And like I mentioned earlier, it's kind of a curveball, not only in like their whole career, but there's nothing else on the album that sounds like this. I mean, you can compare it to the closing track, which is also a really long track. In fact, it's probably like twice its length, but it's, well, the last song is like 12 minutes, if I remember.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I guess I forgot how long it was. You are correct about that. It is almost twice as long. But I had to think about what the closer was. It feels like the closer feels like it should be like a 4-minute song max. But anywho's.
But yeah, are almost like you're met immediately with like more upbeat, catchy songs like I Might and Dawned on Me. You know, so it's just a song that I think is very specific and unique in Wilco's catalog, and I enjoy it for that. Yeah. And I do have to throw this out there because Tony wouldn't let me include it on the spreadsheet that we created for this episode. But I got to give a nod to Sometimes from Pearl Jam beginning their album No Code. I mean, again, it's kind of like Doll. They hadn't really done a slower opening song before. And like Doll, it's very short. And like Doll, it leads into the next song, Hell Hell, where that song just hits you in the face with its faster chord progression and its tempo and its more rock aggressiveness. That I will say, Hell Hell is not one of the heaviest Pearl Jam songs, but funny enough, it's like one of the heaviest on that album. So I wanted to throw that out there too. But speaking of Pearl Jam, we're going to get into our next category, which Tony and I titled Punchy Album Openers. And this is basically where the album begins full throttle. The album begins where there's really like no anticipation of the song. The song just straightforward. And whether it's indicative of the rest of the album, it may not. But speaking of Pearl Jam, Go, you know, the first song from their album Versus. The song does begin with a slightly little bit of like studio banter in the background.
I was going to mention that. It kind of contrasts what you said.
It has a little bit of a false start, right? Not like Brain and Jay, where that one is actually a false start. He's like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, da na na na. But once Go gets going, it's just like it's grooving, it's fast paced, it's got that dirty bass from Jeff, and then when you get into the chorus, it does that da 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 da, and I just feel like once you get the chorus, it just does not let up in a great way. And it kind of, I feel like was them showing you like, we're still rock, but we're going to do it a little different than 10, you know, like we're not going to be held in this grunge category, a category that some people don't even like putting them in the first place, which I understand. But I think Go is one of their best album openers just for the fact
that
best
songs, dude. Let's be real.
It
like that bass, like the bass tone alone, it just pulls me in every time, that groove. But yeah, it's short. The song, as it kind of says, it just keeps going. You know, it just goes.
And there's no other song on the album that could be like. Can you imagine the album beginning with like Small Town or even like a rock, more of a heavy song like Rearview Mirror Animal? I just don't think it would make the impact that Go does.
Yeah. So, you know, something I was thinking about is, I mean, we're talking about a song from the 90s, from the 90s that, you know, in the grunge scene where things are heavy and probably just getting heavier. But let's take it back a little bit. What could be the punchy opener equivalent from maybe in the 60s? Drive My Car comes to mind. I'm a big Rubber Soul fan. That's probably maybe my favorite Beatles album, which I have a lot of friends that disagree. That is the best.
And I think it's a hot take when it comes to the Beatles.
It's a little bit of a hot take, but something about it just kind of hits right for me. Come from a Beach Boys fan, so maybe that says something.
Yeah.
But that song, it starts off with a little kind of disorienting riff. I had one song, I think it was like an Adam Neely video where he explains it, like comes in on the offbeat, but it just kind of hits you hard, and then it just goes into a catchy song with these real raspy, kind of tight vocals from Paul. It's pretty rhythmic, it's catchy. And maybe, I mean, compared to Go, it sounds kind of lightweight, but compared to the rest of the album, it probably is like the heaviest song on there. Minus maybe Think for Yourself, but
and it should be pointed out. Maybe I shouldn't point it out at the beginning of the episode. Is Tony and I are kind of mostly talking about like rock albums, right? Like we're not
right.
We're not venturing into different genres like jazz or rap, So when it comes to like rock / like pop music, like I agree with you. Like Drive My Car, like is it even their heaviest opener on all their albums? Probably not, but like for that album and for that time period, yeah, I would agree.
One that I wanted to include for a punchy opener would be Let Me Drown from Super Unknown. That is one of my favorite openers. The production's so good. It's just a simple little catchy riff. Not too long of a song. But I just had to throw that out there for all the Soundgarden fans.
And I'm going to refrain from that. One, because I don't think I know that song. And two, we might be doing an episode in the future about that album. But, staying with like the 90s rock / grunge bands, we're going to get into our next category for album openers, and that is the instrumental openers.
For our first example here, I would actually like Rico to share his experience with it as an opener.
Okay, well,
because he, not too long ago, heard Tiny Music from STP for the first time, and he fell in love with it for the most part. So how did that instrumental opener work for you? Walk me through this.
Well, that was my second full-length STP album you'd given me after Shangri-La. And, that album begins with a pretty straightforward rock song, right? But so I was not expecting Tiny Music to begin with not only an instrumental song, but this kind of like jazzy lounge instrumental, right? You have some like electric keys. You got a slick, bass line. You have like there's no like huge guitar solos. It fades in, which I also found very interesting. And yeah, it already made me really anticipate what's coming out on the album. Like, was I expecting the rest of the album to be instrumental, jazzy, like lounge style? No. But I was like, we're probably gonna get more stuff like this. And I do think that happens. I think with what's the one song?
And so I know.
And So I Know, I feel like really fits that vibe of Press Play.
A little slower, but yeah.
Yeah. The song Daisy, again, I feel like it's not the same style, but
it's short instrumental.
A short instrumental that does not sound rock. That one has like a little bit of like blues, a little bit of country in it. I think
this is their most experimental album, I would say, with probably the most variety. So it kind of makes sense that you would have a little bit of a curveball there. And what's cool is on the the deluxe version of this album that they did not too long ago, they included like a 4-minute version of Press Play. So that was cool. That was pretty neat.
And then one I wanted to bring up too is the Frames album For the Birds with that opening track titled In the Deep Shade. I think one of my favorite instrumentals from any album that I own. It's short and it's not like the most dynamic song, but it's just very pretty. It fits the vibe of the Frames music. Like they have rock songs, but then, with having a violinist in the band, being able to bring in the strings, I think really makes the song stunning. It has this kind of like this little guitar. I don't know if it's like a riff, but it almost sounds like a metronome the way it's kind of going back and forth. And it kind of
just like the harmonics at the start.
Yeah, yeah. And then you bring in the piano, and the piano is beautiful, and it kind of comes in and out. And I do think it does have dynamics. It's just like
it definitely does.
It's kind of the opposite of a punchy album opener, but I think it sets up the album fantastically. They included it on their kind of like greatest hits album.
Which is kind of odd that they
Well,
included that.
their
But maybe
greatest
the variety.
their greatest hits was like, what are the songs we would play for people from our band? Like, what would be the songs that we think is the best representation? So I like that. They really enjoy the song. So
I do want to say that's one of my favorite albums, and I think it really does capture the mood quickly. Like, I think the production on that whole album is very unique, and I think that song kind of demonstrates that well.
yeah. Well, all right. We come to our next category, and I'll let Tony start this one off. This one
Yes.
is I'll let you do it, Tony.
So this one here is going to be openers that establish the album's themes. So this could, you could look at it maybe as, oh, this song represents kind of the genre, the type of songs we're going to hear, but we're going to take it a step further and maybe talk about maybe like, the subject matter of the songs, the lyrics, and in this case, we're talking about the concept of an album. One of my favorite openers of all time would be, what is the full title even?
I was hoping
you're a
knew it.
millionaire. I think I'm something. God, let me. Okay. Everyone just calls it millionaire because it's too long of a title.
This is
But
where I'm going to
songs-
cut to we'll be right back.
Songs for the Deaf technically Songs for the Deaf starts with the real Songs for the Deaf. I don't know how that works because didn't you have to do something with the CD to hear it?
I think you had to click backwards, like you're going to the previous track. Yeah, it's a hidden track technically.
Okay, so if it's a hidden track, then it still counts.
Yeah.
You
we'll
think I ain't worth $1, but I feel like a millionaire. So that starts off with like the sound of like a car door being open, turning on the radio, switching through the stations, having all of these very entertaining like radio talk over it, very iconic lines, and then it fades. It doesn't fade, but they introduce kind of like a real high pass, low pass drum groove with the guitar riff, and then when the song's ready to start, this come in full force with the scream, these fat guitars and drums, and it's just like the coolest thing ever. But it fits the category because the concept of the album is, like a car ride and going through stations. I mean, I think that is probably the simplest way to describe it. And I think that describing the opener did the exact same thing. And even though it might be like a minute of the intro before the song starts, maybe like a little over 30 seconds, it is very entertaining and keeps my attention every time. I smile when I hear it.
And I did
Over
want
the
to
top.
throw out that I do feel like their other album, like Clockwork, kind of begins too with similar themes. It doesn't obviously have the radio actual returning theme throughout the album, but like Clockwork is basically about Josh almost dying. And I feel like Keep Your Eyes Peeled, the album opener, kind of sets up that theme with its really dark lyrics and just dark music overall. But the one I wanted to throw out, of course, we got to bring it to Bruce Springsteen, right? And we're going to bring it to Tony's favorite Bruce Springsteen album out of like the 3 he's heard so far. And that is Darkness on the Edge of Town. That album begins with Badlands. And let me pull up the quote from Wikipedia because I think it says it best. It says, the lyrics on Darkness focus on ill-fortuned characters who fight back against overwhelming odds. Now, Tony's kind of like, but me knowing maybe a little bit more about Bruce, I think that's really fitting. Yeah, sometimes he sings specifically about lower classes or middle class, right? But like, I feel like in Badlands specifically and the whole album, he is singing about overcoming something. He's singing about like getting away, and like, yeah, you could return to even the last line on the opening track of Born to Run, Thunder Road, where he sings, this town's full of losers and I'm pulling out of here to win. But Badlands is more about like facing it, almost like in a battle, Badlands, we have to live it every day. And, it's the rest of the album. Like he's singing about stories and about characters who are trying to make their way in the world. Factory, he's singing about his dad working in a factory, just trying to make a living.
There is a lot
Um,
of like characters that do face
yeah,
adversity. I guess I do see
yeah,
that now that you mention it. And I would say too, like the Promised Land, which starts
yeah.
side two, if
Another,
I'm not
yeah,
mistaken, is it's kind of like Badlands Jr.
yeah.
Not top half of the album for me, but it kind of does show, that
Yeah.
once again it's a main theme.
And I feel like also musically too, this like Badlands is a perfect album opener because it is kind of like
It's
these
got
are the type of songs I'm writing on this album. They're not like super long songs like Jungle Land from Born to Run or like the 7-8 minute songs off of The Wild the Innocent, the Street Shuffle.
it's
These
got
are
a
more,
guitar solo, a
yeah,
sax
they're
solo,
punchy, they're verse, chorus, bridge, like, and I want to throw it out there too. He has other albums like this. I would say another really big one is The Ghost of Tom Joad, where every song is like a different story of people living really interesting lives in like the mid 1900s in like the United States and like Mexico. And they're all storytelling songs. And The Ghost of Tom Joad is like the most popular song from that album. And if you listen to Ghost of Tom Joad and you like that storytelling and you like the music, well, you're in luck because the rest of the album is exactly like that. So, themes for days.
All right, next one, which I kind of in my head kind of associate kind of with like opening with the single, is opening with the title track, which may or may not be a single, which in this case it is. The one I'm going to talk about here is London Calling. We had Rico had listened to London Calling for the first time here on the podcast, and you enjoyed a lot of it.
Yeah, I enjoyed actually more of it than I thought I was going to. Can't say I've returned to it a lot since then. Certain songs, but not like the whole album. But
It is a long album.
I do think one of the highlights is indeed the opening title track.
Yeah, it is definitely one of the darker sounding songs. It's hard hitting. It's got the attitude. Has an iconic bass line. And yeah, it's just I mean, it's just a good song. It's just a
Well,
good.
and what have you and I said about when it comes to title tracks? Because I think that's important for this particular category.
Yeah, for me, if you're gonna name your album after a song on the album, that song probably has some significance. And maybe it's in the form of, what the lyrics are about. Maybe, maybe it's the song, it's just an outlier even. But I think there is extra attention put onto it, so it either should just be a damn good song or maybe mean something.
And I think in this
So,
case, it's both. I think it's
oh,
like one of the best songs on the album, and I think it actually has a lot of themes from the rest of the album on it.
which is a little tougher to kind of assess with this album because it is a bit bloated. There is 19 songs on the album, but kind of like, I would kind of group it maybe with songs like Clamp Down. What was the one I was gonna say? I don't know, kind of like Guns of Brixton kind of has a
I
similar
was thinking
vibe
that
with the
one, yeah.
music. Um,
That one
yeah,
felt a little bit more about the politics around that time and whatnot.
yeah, and then another good example here that you're going to talk about here is "Consolers of the Lonely" from the Raconteurs.
Yes. Now, I don't think maybe as important as London Calling when it comes to like, you know, as it, I don't know, just it doesn't feel
The
as important, right?
context of
But
the album.
yeah, and that's maybe just because the Raconteurs aren't though they're not as popular as the Clash, right? I will say one thing the Raconteurs have done with all three of their albums is their title tracks are always slightly different than the title of the actual album. So the album's called Consolers of the Lonely, and the opening title track is called Consoler of the Lonely, not plural. Same thing with their first album, Broken Boy Soldiers, title track, Broken Boy Soldier. And then their most recent album, Help Us Stranger. And then the actual song on the album is called Help Me Stranger. So I think that's kind of cool. That's just kind of a unique thing that they've done now their whole career. But I think when it comes to title tracks, that's always the one I think of because I think it's one of their best songs out of all three of their albums. it actually really fits for a lot of these, I feel like, categories. Like, I do think it is a punchy opener. I think it like begins the album really strong. Is it as punchy as like Salute Your Solution? Probably not. But I just
It's
love the
about as
dynamics
punchy
of
as
it.
Drive My Car.
Well, okay, so we disagree a little bit, but and I also think like too, like musically, it does fit the rest of the album. Like it has the perfect balance of Brendan Benson like singing the verses, and then Jack White doing the more kind of yelling, singing of I guess the chorus, and then the song explodes for like the last third of the song where they go into that double time feel, and you get little isolated bass solos and excellent drumming, and so
I do love that guitar fill where it's like chromatic, do 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 do, with just like
yeah.
this heavy tone. Like that just popped in my mind thinking about the song, and so I guess that does go pretty hard.
To
So
me, it's very memorable. Like if you listen to the album, that's going to be one
yeah,
of the standout songs.
it's got a lot of character to it.
And that could have been a whole category on its own is memorable, But I feel like a lot of the ones we're talking about are memorable. Now, I think a thing that makes an album opener memorable sometimes isn't the punchiness of it. It's kind of the opposite, which is why Tony and I have a category called slow burn openers. So it's kind of the opposite of a punchy opener. It's not one that maybe is going to get your attention from the first 30 seconds, but I guarantee you by the end of the song, you're going to be like, whoa, that was interesting. That was different. That was cool. I want to listen to the rest of the album.
And I feel like slow burn is it's one of those things you kind of know it when you see it because we were
Yeah.
trying to think of some examples and we were like, well, does that count as a slow burn? And it's kind of just like I guess in your own experience of listening to it. But we kind of played it safe and we chose a song that we had covered here on the podcast that we both agreed on as a slow burn, which would be Drive from REM's Automatic for the People.
Smack, crack, push, whack.
It begins kind of different than other REM albums. I would say it's like kind of their darkest and slowest opener, at least up to this point in their career. Begins with some acoustic guitar, begins with, some very dark vocals from Michael Stipe. He's doing this kind of singing, talking thing for part of it. And, as the song builds, it builds kind of slowly. Like we do get some drums around like the 1 minute mark. We do get some rich bass from Mike Mills, but you don't know where the song's going yet. And you're kind of like, well, this is kind of a slower song to begin an album. Like it's fairly different from Radio Song, which begins Out of Time, which is like a pop upbeat song. But right in the middle of the song, you get Peter Buck playing this guitar riff, which I guess he played with a dime to kind of give it an extra kind of grit to the tone of the guitar. And it just comes in, and then it's followed by the strings that was orchestrated by bassist of Led Zeppelin, which I'm blanking on his name.
John Paul Jones.
There we go. And that's kind
what
of
I'm
where
here for.
that's kind of when the song kind of clicks into place. You're kind of like, whoa, they're going cinematic here. This is super more dramatic than a lot of things they've done in the past. And it just, I don't know, it really, halfway through the song, you're just kind of like captivated. You're like, whoa. But I will say it takes a little bit to get there. You're not going to get captivated in the first 30 seconds.
So, from that explanation, you like the song a bit more than I do. But I will say, I do think it, like, kind of stopping and starting, like, with the drums and stuff, it is kind of engaging. Like, because even though the energy overall is low, you are like, okay, are we, like, kicking in now? Are we going to stay here? And I think that is why it's a slow burn to me and stuff. If you're there for the whole song, if you're in it for the ride, the payoff is there. And that's my thing. If you're going to give me something long or kind of, not just like slow in tempo or vibe, but something that just takes a while to get there, the payoff's got to be there.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly what Drive does. And then one little shout out I wanted to give was Radiohead with their album Kid A. Everything in its right place. First time you ever listen to that album, especially if you listened to it when the album first came out, which of course I didn't, but a lot of Radiohead fans did. Super different album for them. It's where they go a little bit more electronic, and it's kind of a song that's pulsating the whole time. And you kind of feel like it's going to build and break into something more rock, but it doesn't. And that's kind of the whole point of the song. And I feel like the whole album, they're going with a different style. And, it's a song where you don't have just straight up drums. You kind of have like a kick drum thing going on the whole time. And you're like, so is it like a drum pad? Like what's going on? Lots of synths. You have little loops going on in the background. Tom York's got some like looping vocals. He's singing about waking up, sucking on a lemon. You're like, what the hell's going on? And it interests you.
do not know this album, so I'm just as surprised as anyone else here
Yeah.
that doesn't know Radiohead that well.
But it's not like Airbag from the previous OK Computer, where it's just a straightforward rock song. This is like something different, but it is like it's a song that I consider slow burn because, again, you're not hooked. You're maybe hooked really quick because it sounds nothing else like Radiohead did. So I guess maybe somebody say it's more of a curveball, but I also think it's a great slow burn because it never does break into a full on rock song like some of the curveball ones that we talked about. So yeah, it's one that I think fits the category. We have a couple more categories to wrap it up here. I guess we didn't really have a short opener category, but we definitely have a long song opener category.
Yes.
And Tony's going to hit us with maybe one of the longest openers that I know of.
Roundabout from Fragile. So I had given this album to Rico on the podcast, and he actually liked it a lot more than I anticipated, which was crazy. Not even as much though as the King Crimson one, which that's even crazier. Oh my gosh. Anyways, Roundabout is 8.5 minutes long. I know there is like a radio edit of it, but even then it's still long. So Roundabout starts with that little kind of swelling sound, which I believe is a reverse piano. And it has like the really pretty acoustic intro that is it takes its time, doesn't feel rushed, and it takes about a minute to actually get the song running. But when it's going, it's going. It's a well-oiled machine here. And when you have a prog album that has other long songs and goes there, then you're in for a song with a lot of sharp turns, different sections, a lot of dynamics, and I think Roundabout really delivers on that. Because this song ended up being more accessible and popular than the other ones, maybe that kind of maybe I'm looking at it backwards for why it's a good opener. But to me, I think it is a great opener. They revisit the long intro later in the song, so it doesn't feel kind of like bullshit at the start. I feel like after you hear that song, you just kind of like know you're in for some treat for the rest of the album.
Yeah,
Which the second song does not really deliver.
But I will say, if you don't like the length of Roundabout, then this album might not be for you because there's plenty of other songs on the album that are pretty lengthy.
Yeah, that is a good point. Like if you have an album with long songs, then maybe it does make sense to have a long opener. Yeah. And it also ended up being the single for the album as well. So
fits other categories we came up with.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, so that's kind of my initial thought for a long opener. And Rico had one that was kind of a no-brainer that I kind of spaced out on.
Yeah, which is Hotel California, which again, title track of the Eagles album. Now, definitely not as long as Roundabout, and not even the longest song on the album because the closing track, The Last Resort, is like over 7 minutes long.
The Papa Roach song?
No.
Damn.
But Hotel California is about like 6.5 minutes long. Again, it also had a radio edit. But again, like Tony said, even the radio edit is still pretty lengthy. And this is one where it's not as dynamic as Roundabout, right? But
as Roundabout, yeah, that's a high bar.
But it does kind of begin a little gentle with like guitar riff. You're like, where are we going? And it kind of builds, and the drums kick in. You're like, okay, yeah, this is like maybe a slower groove for an opening track. It's not as flashy as like Already Gone, some of their other album openers. taking it easy. You know, it's not as like country sounding as that. But like once you get into the groove of the song, once you get into like the vocal harmonies and the chorus, and once you kind of read into the lyrics and like, oh, the song is like kind of telling a story and it's kind of dark. But then I think it does build, and it's when you get hit with that famous guitar solo at the end. I mean, like it's definitely the payoff for the length of the song. And once you're hit with a guitar solo, you're like, oh, this guitar solo can go on for 4 more minutes, and I'll be happy because it just sounds incredible. The production, the fact that it is like a dual guitar solo, right?
Yeah, which is kind of a lost art in my opinion. And it does not come off as cheesy because I get it. You know, there's a lot of things that just kind of through time have just kind of been outdated. But no, we got to bring that shit back. But I have what might be a hot take. Hotel California is only a good opener because it is an amazing song. So I don't know that whole album front to back, you know, like extremely well, but I have heard this, you know, album probably at least 10 times. And I think Hotel California would just be the most badass closer. You know, that closing line about you can check out anytime you want.
Yeah.
You just can't, what is it, kill the beat?
You can never leave.
You can never leave?
You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave.
Doesn't he also say something about killing the
Well,
bees?
yeah, but that's not.
Is that a different one?
That's a different line. Yeah.
Either
it's in
way.
the song, yeah.
Either way, those lines are so cool. And then ending on the guitar solo, you know, like I feel like that would be a more impactful closer. But it doesn't matter because the song's forever.
Yeah, and there's no other song on the album I think that would be a better album opener. But I agree, it would have been almost cool to do like a different version for the close, because I actually think the closing track on Hotel California, one of my least favorites.
What if the intro to the album was just the acoustic intro to Hotel California?
That would
and then
maybe
later
be
they
cool.
come back and do it for the
But you would need a really good second track on the album for that. And I don't know. New Kid in Town would not, I feel like, be a good second track. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe throw in like a Victim of Love or something as the second track, and then I think it could work.
So we have one more category here, which is transition. So some albums have like a first song that maybe kind of isn't a song, or maybe like once you kind of get to the second song, you're like, okay, now the album is starting. So we have two examples here that kind of are, one's more of a song and the one that's less of a song. I'll go first. Speak to Me, that opens Dark Side of the Moon. Like it's like a minute long. You can barely hear the song. It's pretty quiet. Like it, you know, sometimes you hear an album and you don't know how loud to turn it up to because you don't know if you're gonna get like jump scared.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that. There is, you know, you do hear like the some of the money sounds that you hear on Money. You do hear, to me, it sounds like a helicopter or something. And then the next song starts, Breathe, and you just get like 5 seconds of kind of like this screaming thing, which I had earlier replicated, and Rico told me to never do that again. But it's like 5 seconds long, and then the song starts, and you instantly get put in this vibe, and you're just like, damn, this is going to be a cool album we're listening to.
Yeah, and you know, that type of album opener I think is very interesting because it's the first song, it's still a song on its own that you can listen to, right?
Well, maybe not in this case, but
well, not in this, but still, like it's like, okay, for example, like Linkin Park's second album, Meteora, has like a song called Forward, and I think it's like less than like 20 seconds. And it's just like a sound of something slowly breaking. And then it breaks into like the first real song. That's nothing I would listen to on my own, right? But I feel like with the example you said, and with the example I'm going to say, are songs that like you can listen to on their own. And my example
no,
was,
you can't listen to Speak to Me on your own. You must be getting it confused, bro.
Maybe I'm getting it confused. Okay. Well, then let me just say then I think mine is even better than Tony's.
There you go.
Because
you're allowed to say that. I agree with you.
My example is a song you can listen to on its own, which is the opening song from Incubus's album, Light Grenades. And the opening track is Quicksand. which is not as short as Tony's example, but it is a shorter song. But it's a song that, like, I think technically has a verse and chorus, but they're short. Their instrumentation is very subtle, although it's always reminded me of actually Radiohead's song "Everything in Its Right Place," but a little bit more subdued. But it makes you like, whoa, this album's it's kind of more, it's atmospheric, it's a little darker, it's a little moodier, and it has that like a seamless transition into the next song, which is "A Kiss to Send Us Off."
And if you don't hear "A Kiss to Send Us Off" after, it's jarring and it sucks and you're disappointed every time.
I mean, it does begin with that like guitar riff, which is like, but like I can't imagine the album beginning with just "A Kiss to Send Us Off." It would feel out of place.
So, something I'm kind of noticing as I'm kind of thinking about it now, is so "Speak to Me" does have like the heartbeat in it, which I guess is the closest thing you have to like a song. And "Quicksand" is kind of a trancy, kind of hypnotic opener. So,
Yeah.
you know, so I feel like maybe having something that's kind of more grounded but doesn't maybe go as far is kind of the move with these transition tracks.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and I almost think too that some of these transitional tracks would lend itself to one of our other categories, which was the albums that begin with like the theme that establishes the theme of the album.
Right. I mean,
Because
it's hard to justify "Speak to Me" being instrumental, kind of laying the foundation for a theme. You know, at least for me, that's
Yeah.
kind of hard to say, but I do see what you're saying, though.
Because couldn't you also say, like, can't remember exactly how it goes, but the opening track on the Panic at the Disco album you gave me last year, isn't that one just literally called like Introduction?
Oh, yeah.
But it does kind of segue into the first song on the album, and it does kind of set the theme a little bit. So we do have this like last category, which is kind of like transitional songs that kind of set up the theme,
Or,
but
you know, like,
they're not songs
it
that
could
would
be like a vibe, kind of,
Yeah.
you know, almost like a palate cleanser, almost just like, you know, all right, whatever you heard before.
a
this is
palate
what we're
cleanser
doing.
before you even begin the album.
Yeah, you know, kind of.
But yeah, I mean, I think all of these album openers are important in their own ways. Like, I do think if you're a great band, you can pull off at least a couple of these different album openers within your career. You know, I don't think every album opener needs to be a punchy one. I don't think every album opener needs to be the lead single from the album or a title track. But I think that all of these stand on their own as interesting ways to begin an album. And I think all of these categories hook you in different ways. And like Tony and I said, for me at least, I need to be hooked into an album. But like I said, not one of these is the only way to hook, you know, for me to be able to be into an album from the very beginning. It can be a curveball. It can be a punchy album opener. As long as you could do something that makes you want to listen to the rest of the album, and even more importantly, want to go back and start the album again with that opening track, I think sometimes it's a little undervalued, especially these days, because we're in the streaming service where you can't skip songs so easily.
Yeah, no, I get you on that. And, you know, I think with some of these, the intersectionality of these openers is kind of like the strength of it. So like, you know, Roundabout, I feel like you could put in a lot of different categories. You know, and some of them, like, you know, you can do too much in one opener and then maybe kind of you know, soil it, if you will. But it is cool how many of these you could kind of like group together.
Yeah. So let us know, what are other categories that you would consider for different album openers. Let us know what are your favorite type of album openers, and let us know what are your actual favorite album openers. And Tony and I will be back next week with probably another different type of episode, probably another maybe topic one, maybe a little argumentative, maybe some games. But we are going to be taking a small break from our album for album series. So stick around to find out what we do next week. And until then, we hope you take care and you'll be hearing from us soon.